your permission and your assistance. And this subject is regarding a concept that is definitely highly misunderstood by the general public in the country that you live in the United States. The general public misunderstands in a very significant way this concept. And this concept, of course, is the concept of jihad. This term jihad evokes great anxiety in many people, in the public. And interestingly enough, it also evokes great anxiety amongst Muslims as well. Right? There is obviously a great misunderstanding about this idea and this concept and what it means in the Muslim tradition. Now, it may not be confusing to many of us who are here today. It may be very crystal clear to us. But sometimes it's crystal to us in our minds and in the languages, in our native languages. But it's not crystal clear to us in the English language. And here's what I mean. You might understand it clearly in your own mind, in the languages that you dream in Urdu, in Arabic, in Bengali, in any other language that is native to you. But sometimes it's not clear how to express these ideas in the English language. And what I hope to do today and in the series that I hope to be able to present to you in the coming months, in the new year, is to be able to give you the tools in the English language to be able to have this conversation with your colleagues at work, at school, and anywhere else you meet people who are interested and confused about this question. Always jihad, by Muslims as well as by non-Muslims, is always understood in the context of war. Right? And obviously, jihad has something to do with war, but it doesn't have everything to do with war. In fact, jihad is not exclusively about war. However, war and peace, and the making of war and the making of peace, is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained and clarified in the Quran. Right? Which sometimes to Muslims is surprising, and certainly to non-Muslims it is also very surprising. Allah talked about war and peace in the Quran. Yes, He did. He talked about war, He talked about peace in the Quran. Sometimes Muslims, in their attempts to clarify jihad, they'll use a phrase called holy war. A lot of the English translations of the Quran done by 19th century and 18th century Muslims and others usually will use the term holy war to describe the word qital in the Quran, or even to describe the word jihad in the Quran, or to describe the word qital and jihad, these are Arabic terms, in the other literature that Muslims have produced. The translation will be holy war. Right? And then Muslims tend to, in our discourse in the 21st century, 2014, moving into 2015 in a few days, we continue to use the word holy war. That additionally adds to the confusion. When Muslims start to use the word holy war, it continues to add confusion. So what I want to do for us, and I'm doing this sequence of khutbah at multiple other masajid, in order to get us all on the same page, inshallah, with respect to these ideas, and with respect to how we talk about this in the public. Inshallah, today I will give you some ideas, and inshallah in the future khutbah I will give you the ayat of the Quran, which I will not dwell on that much today, but I will give you the ayat of the Quran in other future khutbah. But today I want to present to you the core concepts and some of the trouble, some of the problems, some of the contextual information around jihad and war and peace that continues to beleaguer us and confuse us. One of the things that we need to understand, this goes without saying, but it's worth repeating, that if you're going to understand and clarify these concepts, you have to go back to the source. You have to go back to the Quran, you have to go back to the Sunnah, you've got to go back to how scholars in the Muslim tradition understood these things. What we can't do, right, and this is the reactionary problem that we Muslims face. So the Taliban did something terrible in Pakistan, right? Now we begin to explain what the Taliban did. And what we're doing from the very beginning is to try to explain something that is a gross violation of jihad, of war and peace, and of many other ideas in the Muslim tradition. We begin to explain what is a positive idea and an ennobling idea, which is jihad, in the context of a most horrible, basically a crime. You could even say a crime against humanity. So you understand, we are attempting to explain things in the context of violations of the very same thing we're trying to explain. What do you think that does to us? It puts us in a very bad position to have to try and explain things. And by the way, this is not simply a discourse that is problematic between Muslims and non-Muslims. Between you as Muslim, as adults, explaining this to your children or your teenagers. So this is a huge problem. And one of the things we have to proactively attempt to do is to clarify these questions at a time when we are not pressured by the public to have to explain these things. Okay? There's a bunch of people dying for us Muslims to explain why did Muslims kill 145 or 50, 150 children a few days ago in Pakistan? Why? You know, the answers are hugely complex. You know, it's a geopolitical problem that has caused the rise of Taliban. And, you know, we could go on the history for 2 hours, for 10 hours. But what you're faced with doing is, in a minute or two, having to explain and defend what? We're not even sure what are we defending. Are we defending the Taliban? Na'udhu billah. We're not defending illegal and immoral and unethical and wrong actions by any stretch of the imagination. Well, we have to try and defend Muslims or the Islamic understanding, and so on, right? So let's begin at the beginning with a couple of ideas. And I would like you to really absorb what I'm saying, because I'm hopeful that this is going to be helpful to you. So, when you talk about the word jihad, and we immediately, by mistake, erroneously, we as Muslims use the word holy war to describe jihad. That's the first mistake. Okay? So, what will convince us of that? Take the word holy war and translate that into the Arabic. What do you get? Those who know Arabic, what do you get when you translate the phrase holy war precisely back into the Arabic? What do you get? Somebody like to volunteer? Harb al-Muqaddas. Now you see this phrase, Harb al-Muqaddas, it does not appear in the Shari'i literature. That is, it is not a phrase that is coined by the scholars of the Sharia. When speaking about war or peace, when speaking about jihad, there is no such phrase in the Muslim tradition. It's absent from the Muslim tradition. Holy war or Harb al-Muqaddas. It's absent. So that's the first thing we need to really absorb. In the Muslim tradition, there's no such concept as holy war, war that is muqaddas. There is a concept of war. There's a concept of qital, fighting. But harb and harb muqaddas, there isn't. Okay, so let's absorb that. Let's make sure we understand that. In the Shari'i literature, there is no such concept. So where did the concept of harb al-muqaddas or holy war come from? I'll go to that in a minute. I want to go back to the word jihad, which we confuse with holy war. So now we should be very clear that jihad and holy war are two very different things. Jihad is not holy war. Never make the mistake of using the phrase holy war to describe jihad. That's the first thing. Very important. So what else is jihad related to? Etymologically, linguistically speaking, you have heard of the term mujahada. Those of you who are Arabs, who speak Arabic, of course you know mujahada. You also have heard of the term ijtihad. The ones who are not Arabs, you have heard of the term mujahada or ijtihad. You know, these two words are obviously intimately related with the word jihad or jahada. He strove. This is the root word in the Arabic language. Jahada and mujahada and ijtihad. Mujahada is the one who strives against great odds. Okay? The one who strives against great difficulties and overcomes them. Ijtihad is the generic description given to that set of tools and techniques in the usul al-fiqh, which scholars use to come to, after great effort, to come to an answer for a new situation that Muslims might raise or face as they live their lives in different times, in different places. Okay? That's what ijtihad is. It's a very ennobling concept, ijtihad. Okay? It's a very powerful tool within the Muslim tradition to continuously be able to make the revelation of Allah relevant for us in any place, any time. You see, we live on Earth today. In the future, if we live on Mars or any other society, any other physical location other than the Earth that we are familiar with, ijtihad will continue to create operational understandings of how to implement Allah's guidance in our lives. And it doesn't matter if you live on Earth, and it doesn't matter if you live on Mars or any other area in the world, or in the space, in the universe. Right? So this is what ijtihad is. And jihad and ijtihad and mujahada, these are all connected. So now let me go back to holy war. We need to clearly understand this concept of the word holy war is not a word and a phrase that comes from the Muslim tradition. It comes directly from the Christian tradition. Right? It comes directly from the Christian tradition. And where does it come from? You see, if you think about Christians, people who claim to follow Isa alayhi salam, right? And Muslims have a particular view of what Isa alayhi salam taught according to the Quran, and how his followers and later on people sort of contorted and confused what he taught and created something else. But nevertheless, from a religious phenomena standpoint, early Christians were a minority, right? For a number of hundred of years, early Christians were a minority, and they were persecuted minority. The Romans persecuted them, other groups persecuted them. Right? And so, when you talk about the growth of early Christian communities, they grew through preaching and missionary activities. Okay? They didn't grow through political and socioeconomic power. That's not how Christianity grew in the early 200-300 years. Okay? It's only when Constantine, in the 4th century, this is post 325 AD. 325 AD is a seminal year in Christian theology because in 325 AD, in the Council of Nicaea, Christian scholars formulated what we now today know in Christian theology as this idea of the Trinity. Okay, that's when it was first established. And then in the next 200 years, there were multiple councils that created the whole infrastructure of current Christian theology. Okay, which of course the Quran takes a great exception to. But until this point in time, Christians were a minority, they were a persecuted minority. And once Constantine forced the Council of Nicaea to come to an idea, he then, through the power of him being an emperor of the Roman Empire, pushed Christianity and made Christianity the official religion, and pushed Christianity on the rest of his empire. Right? And so now, Christianity became a world power, because an emperor was an atheist, he was a pagan. Right? Who adopted Christianity as his official religion, even though his sister, Constantina, opposed him in the Council of Nicaea. It's an interesting factoid from early Christian history. Constantina said to him that what you're doing in this Council of Nicaea is wrong. You should be supporting those bishops who were supporting the idea that Isa alayhi salam is a teacher and a prophet and a guide from Allah, not one of this Trinity. This was a fight in the Council of Nicaea, and Constantine had supported the other party. Hence, the establishment of this particular idea of the Trinity in larger Christian population. So when Christianity became an official religion backed by a political power such as Constantine's, and thereafter, Christians now began to have to deal with issues of war and peace, because now you had political powers that were Christian, whose leaders were ostensibly Christian, whose leaders were ostensibly pushing Christianity, in some cases violently pushing Christianity on communities. And we have a record and history of that. and there arose a conversation knowing that Isa alayhi salam, or Christ in the language of early Christians, was perceived to turn the other cheek, right? That we had to reconcile now political powers who ostensibly were Christians pushing very violent agendas, wars in some cases, trying to understand how can Christianity be reconciled with the warlike actions of Christians, of political Christians, of political leaders who were Christians. Right? So this is where people had to deal, and one of the first church thinkers that addressed this question was St. Augustine, right? Who talked and began to talk about the ideas of a just war at a certain point in time. You know? This is the genesis of how war and the thinking of war in Christian minds developed. And then there were others, Ambrose of Milan and Thomas Aquinas and Hugo Grotius. All of these Christian thinkers talked about and established this idea of a just war. It's interesting because I'm going to compare for you how Muslims thought about these ideas. So it took a bit of time to come up with ideas in their own heads and minds. Right? What's interesting is that they could not refer to revelation to figure out, well, what does Allah think about it? What does God think about these issues? You know, we humans think about these things, and these great thinkers, and they were great thinkers in the Christian tradition, articulated what is a just war, what is not a just war, when is war legal, when is war not legal. But they had to cook this all up. They had to come up with their own in their own minds. It's not a problem, but it's interesting to note that they didn't have revelation to guide them. Not so the Muslims. Right? When we look at that same path, not so the Muslims. Muslims had a lot of guidance. And then when the papal states arose, when different states within Europe arose, there were times when Christians were fighting other Christians, attempting to justify in their own minds, is this legal or not? Is this halal or not? Right? They had this problem. They had to face this problem. But not until Pope Urban did war, justified war, actually transform into holy war, when Pope Urban authorized various groups, right? These are various kingdoms, to fight in the name of the church, and actually called it holy war. He gave them permission to carry the cross as a sign of authority, an authorization from the Pope. And of course, these people stopped and reduced the infighting because they were becoming united, and turned outwards, fought others, particularly Muslims. So this is the history of the Crusades, starting from 1000 AD to 1200 AD. And it is in this period that war, in the Christian mind, developed into this idea of holy war. So, in summary, we have to be very careful never to use the phrase holy war to describe jihad. It has nothing to do with each other. Okay? Although the concepts of just war that the early Christian thinkers developed are important for us to understand. So there was this transition from early Christians who only talked about peaceful lives, right, turning the other cheek, to Christians who became more powerful in their societies, to Christians who fought each other, to Christians who fought others. And the idea of war developed from no war and peace to wars, just wars, to holy wars. This whole transition did not occur in the Muslim experience. The Muslim experience, as you know, the Prophet ﷺ was not authorized to wage and respond to aggression against him while he lived in Mecca. But after the Hijrah, he was not only authorized to, but encouraged to, in the language of the Quran, Allah's revelation, to fight those who fight him. Fight those who kick you out of your homes. So the just cause, right, the just cause understanding of fighting those who fight you developed very early on in the Muslim tradition, while the Prophet ﷺ was still alive. Right? And it became imprinted in the understanding of jihad, of war, and peace, right from the very beginning. Revealed to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is enough verses, which I will not go over today, but I will go over in the future, but I want to give you a frame for you to be able to navigate in the English language these concepts with your colleagues and those who ask. So, in the Muslim tradition, the Prophet ﷺ dealt with war, dealt with those who opposed him. First, in the Meccan period, okay, refusing to oppose them, okay, and this was guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then in the Medinan period, being ordered and commanded to, and there were people amongst the Muslims and the Munafiqeen in Medina who were not very happy with this, right? There were people who said, why should we go fight? And Allah said, you must go fight to defend your rights. And we will look at these verses. And the important thing to recognize through this process is that in the Muslim tradition, not every act of war is jihad, and not every act of jihad is war. Okay? I'll repeat that again. Not every act of war is jihad. If a group of Muslims is fighting another group, Muslim or otherwise, that does not, because the original group, the initiating group is Muslim, that does not automatically become jihad. Could be a war. Only if the war has a just reason for it, can it be called jihad. Because if it's not, if it's for land, if it's for glory, if it's for revenge, this is not jihad. It's war, but it's not jihad. And not all war is jihad. And not all jihad is war. When you work very hard to earn a living to support your family, this is part, and this can be called jihad. When you struggle against yourself to remove from you the tendency to want to sin, this is also called jihad. It's not war, but it's jihad against your nafs. Right? So this is part of the understanding of jihad. Okay, so please remember, internally, not all jihad is war, and not all war is jihad. Okay, and internalize this. I'll end the first part of this khutbah with three ideas that I want you to memorize. Those three ideas are that when we talk about jihad with respect to war, three principles apply, and these are principles that Allah clarified in the Quran, the Prophet clarified in all of his war engagements. The first one, non-combatants are not legitimate targets. You've got to understand this very clearly. Okay? There is no exception to this rule. Non-combatants, somebody who's not fighting you, is not a legitimate target. The only people that are legitimate target are the ones who are actually fighting you. So non-combatants are not legitimate targets. That's number one. Number two, the religion of the person you're fighting or the group you're fighting is not a cause for war against them. There are other causes that the Quran clarifies, but religion, their beliefs, is not one of them. So let me say this statement to you again very clearly. A Sunni who's fighting a Shia and says, I'm fighting because of the Shia's religion, or the Shia who's fighting a Sunni and says, I'm fighting the Sunni because of his religion, this is whatever it is, it's not jihad. Whatever it is, it's not legitimate in the eyesight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the teachings of the Sharia. Okay? So the second point is that the religion of a person or the group in no way constitutes a cause of war against them. In other words, religion cannot be used to justify war. The religion, the different religion of the group you're fighting cannot be used to justify war against them. Very important. Third one, aggression, starting aggression. And by here, we mean preemptive aggression. You know, you say, I suspect that guys are going to attack me. Let me go attack him first. Preemptive aggression. Aggression in general is not allowed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow us to aggress on one another. However, the use of force is justified in self-defense. And one of the key things the Quran talks about, without sharing with you the verses, that I will do next month inshallah, is in the context when you, living peacefully in your home, are dragged out of your home and kicked out of your home. This is one of the key reasons that you are not only given permission, but required to oppose this in self-defense. Right? So the third idea is aggression is prohibited, but the use of force is justified in self-defense. And for what? For the protection of your sovereign rights as human beings. Your right to be safe, your right to have property which no one else can come and grab from you. This is very important. You know, how do human beings live? They don't live in the ether, they live on land, right? They live on property. If you can't be safe where you're living, that's not good. And the revelation of Allah allows you to protect your sovereignty, and you're also allowed to fight in supporting innocent people who are being aggressed upon. So these are two ideas. Aggression is not allowed, but you're allowed to fight to defend your own sovereignty, your own peace, your own land, your own home, and to defend the rights of those who are being aggressed upon, other innocent people. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I'll repeat those three ideas again so that it is helpful for you when you speak to people. Non-combatants are not legitimate targets. One. The religion of a person or a group of people is not a cause to fight them. Number two. Aggression is prohibited, a priori. It is prohibited, except in the cause of self-defense. Except in the cause of self-defense, and self-defense in the context of your rights being violated when your land is taken away from you, when you are aggressed upon in your homes, or in the defense of other innocent people. These are the three conditions that I'd like you to understand and memorize and begin to feel comfortable in having the language constructs to talk about this issue with others. It's important. Language is very important. You know, we live in the United States. The majority language, number one, is English. There is a second majority language. Spanish, right? I don't know Spanish. If I did, I would tell you how to say these things in Spanish as well. Arabic is not the number one. Urdu is not the number one. And while it's important to understand these constructs in our native languages, languages that you were brought up with, your children are not brought up with Urdu, I'm sorry to say this. Neither Arabic. Their primary language is English. And we need to help our children be fluent in understanding Islam in the language of the society. Because that's how they view and think, and that's how the rest of the society views and thinks. Right? So it's important to have a grasp of explaining this deen, this religion, in the language of the society. And so I'm hopeful that these constructs of English are going to be helpful to you to explain these things. Because you're going to be asked about this craziness that occurred in Pakistan, unfortunately. May Allah guide and give patience to the families who are grieving. And may Allah guide the government in its response. Because one of the challenges, I'm talking about the government of Pakistan, one of the challenges in responding is that you respond out of anger and out of the need for revenge. And you see, what did I just tell you? Aggression is not allowed for ideas of revenge. But it is allowed, fighting is allowed for self-defense. And sometimes countries, groups of people, they start on the path of self-defense and morph into aggression beyond the original justification. This is important, and may Allah guide those who have to make these very difficult decisions on the path of righteousness rather than on the path of revenge. And may Allah guide all of us in being able to rationally and calmly explain these things to our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends, who see these incidents, and they happen every now and then, and they see this, and they see violence, and they see Islam through the lens of violence, through the lens of irrationality. And it is your job It is your job. You live in this country to clarify that, to help them see Islam not through the lens of violence, not through the lens of aggression, but through the lens of the teachings of the Prophet. Okay? And you will successfully do this, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you have the right language to explain to them, when you have the right presence of mind. You see, you are ambassadors. Okay? If you get nervous about answering a question, guess what will happen? The receiving person will say, the guy is nervous, they don't know what either they don't know, or they're nervous about attempting to hide the truth. Right? So the way you talk about these issues is critical. It's critical. You are representatives, whether you like it or not. I know you didn't sign up to be the representative of Islam to all Americans, but you are. You don't like it? Go back home. My advice is don't go back home, stay here. Gain the confidence, the understanding, and the eloquence to talk about this to your neighbors. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين واقم الصلاة